All right. So today we're talking about metaphysics, ontology. Also, sorry about being late today. Like, I was planning on like being like, yo, we should all start showing up on time to class so we can like start on time and stuff. But then I showed up like 4 minutes late, so I guess I can't say that anymore. But like, let's still try to do that, I guess. Yeah. So metaphysics, ontology. Who does this sound interesting to?
I literally don't know what that is.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so we'll talk about like what that means in a bit. But first, let's talk icebreakers. What in your life has never changed and what has had the biggest effect on you? And are those two the same thing? This doesn't sound like metaphysics, but there's a connection here that we'll get into. But yes, answer the question. Who wants to go first? Yes, Chris.
My name has never changed. I would say my name is like probably the least, one of like the least, like if I saw my name out like Matthew or John, I don't think that really would have affected how I like the name.
So that's yeah, so those are completely opposites there, right? Like the thing that has never changed has had the least effect on your life. Okay, interesting. Anyone else? Or like, yeah,
in my case, the two things are the same. My mental illnesses have never changed. Like whatever I'm going through now, exactly the same as what I went through as a kid.
Oh,
and I would say it has had the biggest effect on the way I think, the way I speak, the way I process, even just the way I function. So, yeah, it's kind of a depressing answer, but it's just kind of hard.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, in that case, they definitely do align, I guess, right? Interesting. Mari?
As like a medium answer, I would say like my hair has always been curly.
Uh-huh.
That's not like that big of a thing. But like for like East Asians, it's like
Oh,
very
yeah.
rare. And I think my mom like has it. And I realized like in East Asia, there's like that stereotype for like curly hair people are like crazy or something.
What?
Like it's like really weird. It's like or like messy or something, something like that, unprofessional.
Interesting.
And then I feel like so my mom always emphasized like the uniqueness of having curly hair, and like everyone in my family, like my grandma. So it was like nice. It was like nice. It was like, oh, my hair's curly, not like other girl, you know. But it wasn't that big of a deal either. It was just like sort of in between.
So like, has it had a big effect, you think?
Not really. It was just like a fun little thing. Like, oh, my hair's curly.
Yeah. Interesting. Who else? Yeah,
I was gonna say like the same thing. Like my entire family has curly hair.
Oh.
Like all my aunts and uncles and cousins, my mom and dad have curly hair, but me and my siblings all have straight hair.
That's
so
weird.
It's like, I don't know, like it was like it's not like a big effect, but when I was younger, it was like, I don't know, like I thought curly hair was always like so beautiful because my mom had like really long curly hair. And I was always like jealous. I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I had beautiful hair like that.
Yeah.
But then now I'm just like,
okay. So like maybe it had a big effect at one point, but like not as active of an effect now. Okay, cool. Tanuj.
My appreciation for wit has never changed. Wit. Yeah. I love it. What's had the biggest effect on me? Probably the namesake concept.
Interesting.
No.
Sid.
I think one thing that never changed probably like me moving around because
You what?
It's always like it always changes.
Oh, moving around?
Yeah, right. I cannot like I've never been like at comfort after some point in time, right?
So
Like your entire life gets included.
the only constant is change.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's kind of weird to say, like,
Not this conversation. Not this conversation.
Wait, I never met someone who's
Oh no. Okay, wait. So Tanuj has his tattoo story. The equivalent of that for Sid is like his like growth story.
So cool.
Like it's a cool story, but like when you're this guy's roommate, like this came up literally 2 days ago, and I said the exact same thing. Like it's a great story. Listen to it after class, but like we're not gonna go through it right now.
The biggest effect is probably current CMU.
Oh wow.
So yeah, pretty much. I think
I wonder like how much that'll hold like 50 years down the line or
yeah,
something.
but, like
right?
it's always like that's also not good. It's always going to be changing, right?
Yeah.
Because at each point in your life, you compare some certain things as bird and that changing.
Uh-huh.
And so CMU at the present is like dictating a lot on how I make my decisions now and in the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. Interesting. Next. Yeah.
I'd say like a lot of my like close relationships with family and friends haven't changed, but like one specifically is like my relationship with my cousin. She's like my best friend, and like I've been away from her like for so long because like we've been in different countries and stuff, but like we're still so close, and yeah, super grateful for that. And what has had the biggest effect? I'd say like I moved away from home when I was like 12 because I went to boarding school, so I think that like yeah, that like caused a lot of like I'd say like mostly like good things, but yeah, it's like impacted me a lot.
So like almost like being close to family is what has never changed, but like being far has had the biggest effect. Interesting. Nathan?
I was gonna say my name has never changed. But I'm not sure that I got an A changed to an E.
Really?
My name now is spelled NathanIel, but originally the last name was
Oh. Why was it?
Or does everyone call you Nathan?
Never called me Nathan. Yeah, I think besides that, the thing in my life that's never changed is I've always just been objectively large. I don't know what effect that's had on me, but that's always a constant.
Interesting. Being big. Cool. Were you like born like larger than normal as well?
Yeah, I was.
Oh wow, that's crazy. Yeah, Antu?
This is super unrelated, but I just noticed the announcement you made on March 3rd, which I guess I never responded to. Does that mean I'm in trouble or that like my midterm?
Wait, which one is it?
People miss the preceding class.
Yeah. Like I'm pretty sure you were like at the midterm
Yeah, I
assessment.
said it very
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't have to write.
Like it would still be good to like write down what you said just for like future reference, but like that it was mainly for people who did show up that day.
So I'm in the clear, right?
You should still write it down on the Canvas discussion.
I'll do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, but like yeah, you like passed your midterm grade. Yeah.
I'm in the clear.
Yes, you're good. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. All right. I think that's everyone, right? Oh, yeah. What in my life has never changed? I always forget to like think about my own answer to these. What in my life has never changed? I guess my identity, right? I think my identity, my own interpretation of my identity is obviously what has changed, and like what I identify with has changed a lot. But like now when I see my identity, I think the core of that has like always been with me. And I'd say that is actually very like that has had a big effect on me too, especially in the last few years. I think the identity that I've sort of like crafted internally that I like use to contextualize myself with the world and everything else. I think that's been very kind of instrumental in the actions I take and who I consider myself to be today. Cool. All right, so let's ask a very basic question. Does a marker exist?
Like a linguistic one?
No, this marker. Raise your hand if you think a marker exists. A marker as in like this is a marker, this is a marker. Do markers exist? Raise your hand if it's a yes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys think markers exist? A marker no? Okay. Do you?
I don't know.
Okay. Does anyone think a marker doesn't exist?
What if you just think
Right.
that nothing exists? So does
Then-
it mean that marker?
Yeah, then a marker wouldn't exist. Okay, cool. So I guess first I'll ask the people who think a marker doesn't exist to defend that viewpoint. Would anyone like to defend this view? Yeah, Kurt.
Yeah, so I hold the view of what is called neurological nihilism.
Uh-huh.
And that's like basically like no composite object exists because it's like ill-defined. Like you constantly have molecules with like marker hitting and like it's not like a well-defined object. And it's like only subjective. So the only things that neurological nihilists believe is that exists is neurological symbols, which are like fundamental particles, fields, and stuff.
Okay. Interesting. But are those particles directly observable, right? I guess that's another issue.
Yeah, that's like a good question.
Yeah. Interesting. Would anyone like to defend the existence of a marker? There were a lot of people who, yeah, I think they did.
I'd say, like, you're interacting with something. Like, if you were to handle whatever it is in your hand, it would be holding something.
Right?
Yeah.
Chris. What are you holding in your hand?
I'm holding a group of neurological symbols.
Okay.
Oh,
Bruh. I guess you have to know that something exists in order to be able to throw it. But let's continue. Let's talk about ontology. So ontology is the study of like what exists. It comes from the Greek word like ontos or something, which means like existence. We talked about epistemology, which is about knowledge, right? Like where we gain knowledge from and how we know, how we come to like true knowledge. So the equivalent in Indian philosophy is pramana and prameya, right? So pramana theory is epistemology, these like means to knowledge. And prameya are the objects of knowledge, the knowables. So we arrive at this like interesting question of, we have a set of knowables and a set of existence. And we want to kind of determine the relationship between these sets. So there's four possibilities, right? Either the set of knowables is equal to the set of existence. Everything that is knowable is an existent and vice versa, or they're completely disjoint, that knowables are completely different from what exists, right? And that would mean that we never have any knowledge on what actually exists, and what actually exists would be completely unknowable. Or there's like the subset varieties, right? The things that are knowable are a subset of things that exist, or things that exist are a subset of things that are knowable, right? And both of those are sort of more blurry ground. But I guess, does anyone have strong opinions on any of those four positions? Yeah, Dinesh.
I think you can know the concept of a two-dimensional circle without it existing, a perfect circle.
Okay, so you'd say that existence are a subset of knowables.
Yeah.
Interesting. Does anyone have another opinion in this like four-way split?
I was gonna say
Or-
my opinion, but
yeah.
it's the same thing. I feel like in order for that thing to be like my personal definition of existence, it requires it to be like in some way knowable, because otherwise it's not really relevant. It would show that it exists, but there are things that are knowable that aren't like existing in some sense.
Yeah, I guess like you can like know about a Pegasus, but like do Pegasi exist? Like, is that another example you'd use?
Yeah.
Okay, fair. Does anyone think that all knowables are existent and vice versa? I guess like the set equivalence. Right, everything that we know must exist, and everything that exists is knowable. So that's actually the viewpoint taken by the logical positivists, I think, right? Chris, I'm not like you fact check that.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think the logical positivists take this viewpoint that everything like these two sets are equal. So basically, the point is there's people who are all over this sort of like four-way split, and it varies quite a bit. But before we we're not going to go further down that rabbit hole. We're going to be focusing mainly on this more basic question of like what is there, right? We're not going to be talking too much about the noble, well, like not explicitly, right? But there's like an important distinction to be made there. But like what they're mainly concerned with is how many kinds of entities there are and how many entities there are. So when we answer both of these questions, there's like basically three possible answers we can give. We can say there's like one type of entity that exists, two types of entities that exist, or like many types. And we can say the same three answers for like the entities themselves. So when we say like a kind of entity or a type of entity, we mean like a category of thing, right? So like a marker could be like called like a type of entity, right? Like these markers, and then there are many individual entities, right? So there's many individual markers. And it goes higher up the hierarchy level, right? So, for example, the Advaitins, the Advaita Vedanta school, they're monists on both of these issues. They say that there's only one kind of entity, Brahman, and there's also only one single entity of that type, namely like Brahman itself. Then you also have other people like the Charvakins, right? So they say there's one kind of entity, like material existence. And then there's many of those kinds of entities, right? There's chairs, tables, phones, etc. They say all of these things exist. The Charvakin view is very similar to what I think most people in modern times would say. Like, there is only material reality, right? That's the only type of entity that exists, but there's many individual materials within them. Alternatively, you have pluralism, right? So the Nyaya Vaisheshika school, they say there's many categories of entities. They break it down further. They say basically you have like materials, you have actions, all of these, or like thoughts, all of these different kind of categories. And then within those, you have these many individual types as well. Anyone have any questions on these? Yeah.
So for like the dualists,
Yeah.
do they, like it's not like mind and like body, it's like more like ontological categorization, like things that are like noble.
No, so the Sankhya Yoga school, for example, it is almost a form of mind-body dualism. They have this duality between Prakriti and Purusha, which I think we might have touched on a little before. But the basic idea is you have like Prakriti and like Purusha. Prakriti is like the entire world, right? So you have like trees and like dogs. That's not a dog. And then you have Purusha, which are like these souls, basically, like that just like appear in the they manifest themselves into the Prakriti. And they basically say there's many individual Purushas, there's many of these separate souls, but there's only one Prakriti, right? There's only one material existent. This entire world with all the things in it, blah, 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 blah. And all of this is just matter and evolving, and these individual kind of souls like appear and move around within the Prakriti. So it is a form of mind-body dualism, actually, in the sense that you have like mind and body. And they basically say that these are irreconcilable. There is no way to come to a union between those two. Does that make sense? So they are dualists in something recognizable to like a mind-body dualist in the West. Any other questions here? Okay. So first, let's get into the Advaita Vedanta school. This is like one of the most like the predominant school of Indian philosophy today, right? You hear about it a lot. People say, "Oh, don't call it Hinduism, call it like Advaita Vedanta." It's like, bro, like okay. So they have different schools of philosophy will have different criteria of reality, right? So the Advaita Vedanta school takes this property called abadhita, which is non-sublation. Does anyone know what sublation means? Yeah, I didn't either until like 2 days ago. Basically, sublation means like being like part of something bigger. So like if you have like a person, they are sublated by the fact that they're like part of like society. So a person doesn't exist according to Advaita Vedanta because it's part of this bigger set of like the species of humans. And basically they say we can like keep going, we can keep going. And ultimately what we get is like the unsublatable, the eternal, permanent kind of set, the one thing that does not change regardless of whatever appears. So they have this phrase, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara, which means Brahman is truth, the world is false, life or like a soul is indeed Brahman and nothing else. So basically they have this very kind of ignoring everything else kind of viewpoint where basically everything that you and I think of as real isn't real to them. And instead they only take Brahman, this like underlying consciousness to be the only real. So like to give a more concrete example of this, I'll ask the question, does the world ever appear without consciousness present? Is it possible to like cognize the world, right? Does it ever appear to anyone without the presence of consciousness? Has it ever happened? Have you personally ever like seen a chair without having your consciousness present? Like, not really. But on certain substances, it is the case. Actually, I won't make that argument. That gets into this huge kind of like argument between the Advaita Vedantins and the Buddhists, where actually we're going to get into that in a minute. But basically, for the most part, right, whenever we see the world, consciousness is the one that is present, right? All these things change, right? All these things move around. This chair could be here today, but like tomorrow it won't be here, or I could like burn it and like throw it in the trash can and it won't exist anymore. Same with all of this. All of this can disappear, but what'll never go away is my own like conscious perception. Yeah.
What's the epistemology behind spacing out? Like just looking at something, but not like processing it all. Is that like, I don't know.
What do you mean by not processing it at all?
Like you're just looking at something, but you're not thinking about anything. It's like it's completely dissociated from it.
I think we talked a bit about this at the perception lecture, week 5 or 6, I think. And it's called like non-perceptive, I literally just had the word in my head. Non-apprehensive perception, right? Where basically you are taking an input, but you're not putting any symbols, you're not putting any additional information onto it. Your attention basically becomes projected onto the chair, such that you become the chair. That's the argument that the Buddhists will actually make in a couple slides. That's me.
Wait, so but all of that, even like subconscious processes, would fall under consciousness of this kind, right? If you're thinking about things without realizing that you are, that still counts as Brahman, right?
What do you mean thinking about things without Oh, you mean like putting the category of chair onto chair?
Sure. I mean, anything that you're not aware that you're doing, right? A lot of that happens in the background, right?
I mean, if you mean like the key distinction here isn't subconscious versus conscious, I think it's like whether there is any distinctions being made. So like, for example, if I'm placing the category of chair onto this visual percept of the chair, then that category of chair is like false. All that's real is my raw consciousness of it.
I don't know what that means.
So like it feels like something to like perceive a chair, right? But you don't have to be placing the category of chair onto it. You don't have to be perceiving its blackness, its its color, its height. You don't have to be perceiving all of those
But,
things.
like, even before you're like identifying it with something, there's still all sorts of cognitive processes that come before it.
Like what?
Okay, so like you take visual input, your photoreceptors, some of that stuff, you know, to V1 where you're starting to make certain
Yeah.
categories, and then there's like the higher categories, P2 or whatever, or like V1, you have like one, like if you hold out your thumb like this, then that part of your brain, one neuron's responsible for like half of this width, and then as you process more.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically talking about like the cortical columns, right? Where you have it in
So
occipital
like,
lobe.
there's cognitive processes at like every step throughout the way. Even if you haven't identified it with a chair or its blackness, you're still doing stuff to it, right? Does that count as consciousness?
The question is, where is consciousness actually present in these cortical columns? Right?
Okay, so let's
So
say,
we-
let's say you have like a damaged like dorsal stream or something, like
Uh-huh.
you can't identify it as a chair, you have a lesion there. You're still conscious, right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
So how does that make sense with what you're saying?
No, that's exactly what I'm saying, right? That you have the ability. Most of us, we're only conscious at this level. This is what that Advaita Vedanta would say. They'd say we take in the chair, we do all this processing, right? We recognize it's a chair, we apply these symbolic features, and then we become conscious of it. But the argument they make is that if you train your skills, etc., you can get to the point where you are conscious at this level, where it's just the raw percepts that you become conscious of without any functional input onto it. Cool. So this is basically non-apprehensive perception, right? And this is like the apprehensive perception, where you are putting all these categories and everything onto the stimulus.
Like if you're like, if an object is flying past you
Uh-huh.
and you're not like visually like understanding or making any kind of meaning to it, you can still dodge out of the way because that's being sent to like the more primitive part
Yeah.
of the brain. You're not aware of it in the slightest.
Yeah.
Would that count in any way as consciousness?
Yeah. Definitely, right? Like it's within. I don't think they'd say you're dodging out of the way is like you're dodging out of the way is not necessarily like proof of your consciousness of it.
Like, well, what is the consciousness of it?
The-
If it's not-
Like if you can attest that like, oh, I felt like I saw it moving.
Well, no, but there's like people who are like blind who can still do that, right?
Do what?
Um,
Yeah, so there's this one case where the person has like blindness in one certain spot, and then
you can have like full
Yeah,
blindness.
yeah,
so it-
but then if you place an object in front of them, they can like grasp the object, or they know where the position of that object, even though they can't see it.
What? I mean, there's different kinds too. This is like, okay, so like 90% of the inputs going to like your visual processing stuff, and 10% of it sent to something called a tecto-pulvinar pathway, which is basically, you can simplify it to like reflexes and derivative things like that. So you're not aware of this, like you can like say I'm fully blind, yet you can do some task that a blind person shouldn't be able to do.
Yeah.
There's some people.
Oh, okay, but
There's no consciousness involved in that, so how do you distinguish?
okay, yeah. So in that case, if there's no awareness that they are perceiving this, right? That there is no layer of them that is like, oh, I saw a chair. Then they would say that no, Brahman is not present at this place. But at the same time, you can make the argument that the dislinkage is not here, but rather at a linguistic level. We're only able to test them by saying, did you see the chair? And perhaps the issue that, like the argument that can be made is that they are actually perceiving the chair. It's just that the consciousness that is present here is not linked to language. And that's why they aren't able to attest it. Right?
We're centering like consciousness on the brain when necessary. Well, it's like still a neurological, but it's not like a cerebral phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Vedantins would take it to be a neurological thing. I'm just extrapolating the argument to basically a viewpoint that the consciousness somehow arises at a neurological level. But it need not. Yeah. Cool. Does this answer your questions?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that was sort of more an epistemology thing, I guess. That would have been good if we talked about that like week 7, I guess, but it's still relevant here. So where were we? We were talking about, does the world ever appear without Brahman present? It seems for the most part, no. They make this three-way distinction between Sat, Asat, and Mithya. So Sat is that which is not sublated, namely Brahman, right? So Brahman is always present. There is never a cognition. There is never any existence without Brahman being present. And then Asat is that which is never cognized. So there's like a set of things that never appear in reality, right? Like the horn, like the horn of a rabbit, right? That never appears to Brahman, so that therefore it's asat, it's non-real. And then you also have mithya, which is like whatever is left. And this is where chairs and markers and all of that falls into this category of mithya, according to the Vedantin, the Advaitin. So there's a difference between mithya and asat, and I think that's like an important distinction to be made, right? They realize that it's obviously bad to put like markers in the same category as like the horn of a rabbit or like a Pegasus, right? Because they're still fundamentally different in a way. They're simply making the observation that there's one thing that is never sublated and always present, and that thing is Brahman, this consciousness. The Vishishta Advaita response by Ramanuja around 1000 AD, 1100 AD, is that there's epistemic constraints on knowledge of reality. So he basically has this like double vision thought experiment where he says, let's say there's this cave in the mountains where there's like a species of men who can only see double, right? So when they look up at the moon, they see like two moons, and based off of this perception, they conclude that there's like two moons in the sky. And then based off of this argument, he says that like this could totally be the case with Brahman as well, right? Just like we could be perceiving all of this reality as double, but we could also be perceiving Brahman like with this incorrect perception. It need not be the case that we perceive our consciousness the way it actually is. So there's epistemic constraints on our knowledge of what actually exists, this subcategory of the Advaitin. And then there's like I wanted to talk a bit about Hoffman's like evolutionary perception stuff, Donald Hoffman, which we mentioned a while ago, where he'd basically say that it would be impossible for this like double vision to arise through natural selection, since it's not conducive to actual perception of reality in a way that helps us progress as a species. But we can come back to that later if we have time, which I suspect we will not. Let's talk a bit about Buddhism now. So they have this different form of monism called Swalakshnamanism, where everything is momentary. So you have all these momentary particulars called Swalakshanas, and their criterion of reality is causal efficaciousness. It's called Arthakriya, which literally means like the ability to create the ability to create a cause. Yeah. Yeah. So so can an entity exist if it doesn't have causal power, right? This marker gives me the causal power to like write on this whiteboard. It gives me the causal power to throw this, right? Like it plays a part in the causality of the real world. And what the Buddhists ask, if are there entities that don't have causal power? And to respond to that, that's basically a rhetorical question from them. Can anyone think of an entity that exists that doesn't have causal power? The Buddhists would hope no. They would hope there are no entities without causal power, and I think it's a pretty fair kind of basis for determining reality. Causal power is just the ability to affect cause in the real world. So like this has like the marker has causal power to like,
Entity can't be something like an event, right?
What do you mean?
Okay, so like, what if you say like whatever came before the Big Bang kind of thing? Like, Does that kind of thing work?
Work in does that have causal efficaciousness? If it like caused the Big Bang, then sure. But I think the key kind of thing that they'd say is that like they focus on this idea of momentariness. So they're also the same, they're of a similar opinion to the Advaitin that like things do not exist in the absence of consciousness, right? So if there was a consciousness prior to the Big Bang, and it was there to perceive some existent, but it didn't have causal power, then that's a place that the Advaitin would disagree with the Buddhists on, because the Advaitin would say, see, consciousness was there, it was perceiving, it was cognizing prior to the Big Bang, but the Buddhists would say, okay, it did that, it was conscious, but it didn't have any causal effect on the Big Bang itself. I didn't want to bring the Big Bang into this conversation, but it adds an interesting tinge to it, definitely. But over here on the right is the Buddhist kind of master argument, as they call it. I can like sort of go down this, but the basic idea is that they want to prove that all Swalakshanas are momentary, all existence are momentary and transitive, which is like sort of a core doctrine of Buddhism. So first at the top we have X exists. Can I zoom into this and you'll like see it up there? Yeah, okay. Let's do that. So X exists, then like let's say X exists, then either X is momentary. So can someone pick an object that they'd like to determine whether it's momentary or not? Yeah, so anything that they want to choose that like is this a momentary object or not? A sneeze. I think that's pretty, it's closer to momentary than, like, let's take something that would seem like it's definitely not momentary. That's like a meme. Can we have like a specific meme?
The meme of philosophy, like philosophy. I don't know. Like I don't know.
I think you're coming up with like way too when we do thought.
Sorry.
When we do thought experiments, we want to have like the simplest things that like still suit our needs.
I was thinking of the memory.
That's like let's please
I
pick.
like an apple.
An apple is okay, but like okay. Is that an actual meme? Oh, like a societal meme?
Yeah, like a societal. Not like a.
No, we're gonna do a internet meme of washing your hands. So here is like a good hand, here's the other hand, and here's like a tap. Okay. Now that looks like a face. Okay, but that's actually water.
How about the momentary needs part? How about
We just do like a physical.
So this is
We just do like a multiple.
No, I mean like we're gonna do this. So we're gonna do this drawing on the thing. Is it momentary? Does anyone think this is momentary?
The drawing?
Yeah. Oh, you think the drawing is momentary? Okay.
Wait, what about like?
Okay, that's actually a great. All right, so cotton candy, sure, we'll do cotton candy because like, does anyone think cotton candy is momentary? Like, let's say I have cotton candy right here in my hands, this pink cotton candy. Is it momentary? No. So everyone thinks it's not momentary. Okay, so we've canceled out this side on the left. We think X exists for more than a moment. Does X produce all its effects at once? So like I eat the cotton candy and it tastes good. That's an effect, right? So does it produce all its effects at once? Why?
Yeah, like it helps.
But like I took one bite of it and then like 10 minutes later I can go back and take another bite, right?
Okay. I thought if you had like a bite.
So that's actually going to be relevant. But so X produces its effects successively. I think we're sort of at that conclusion right now. Okay, so does it produce successive effects due to internal factors or due to external factors? Sort of a more hard question.
So, like, what if it's
Both. No, internal to the object itself, like to the cotton candy. Like I'd say it successively produces effects due to its internal factors, right? Because it internally has a bunch of sugar and it has like a lot of it internally. So so it allows you to have sugar taste for over a successive period of time. Yeah. Mom.
Like, I don't know if you've ever gotten cotton candy, just with like you're unfair and like
Yeah.
societal expectations. Like, oh, I should get cotton candy. And then that just plays into like the productive of the effects that it has.
Huh?
Because like cotton candy is just like a norm.
Oh, yeah, I mean that's an important thing too. I think like we're gonna talk about causality if we have time as well, and I think that's like an important thing to bring up too, where like societal causation. Yeah,
So given this, can you say that everything has a cause or is that?
we're gonna talk about causality. We'll get to
That's
this.
what I
Yeah.
was
Okay.
thinking. If you can say that everything has a cause, then like eventually you have to stop it.
Perhaps, Chris.
Would you be able to say external? One thing about it's our taste buds that are like detected. It's like not. It's like a feature of the object.
Okay, so I guess what is like this and this flow on the right should instead say like only due to external factors, right? Like if its effects are only due to external factors, then it can't exist because it doesn't have causal power, like by definition, in this framework. No real object would fulfill that category because it doesn't have causal power, according to the Buddhists. But let's say successive production due to internal factors and like maybe external factors also play a role. Like is that fair? Like it has the sugar inside, so it's inherently sweet. So does it produce like do the internal factors have causal effect due to a change in the cotton candy or due to the internal disposition of the cotton candy? I'm going to say it's due to the internal disposition, right? Like the sugar itself doesn't change. So then we get down to this bottom disposition to produce effects simpliciter, or is the disposition to produce different effects at different times? So disposition to produce different effects at different times. I don't think that's true, right? The sugar is always going to produce like sweetness. So that means we only come down to this produces effects simpliciter. Does anyone know what that means? I totally know what that means. Simply, absolutely, without any qualification or condition. Okay, does that make sense? Let's see. Let's think about this. Disposition to produce effects simply. That means X is momentary. That argument doesn't make sense to me.
That seems like the opposite of what you-
Right? If it just if the sugar in the cotton candy basically just like causes it to produce sweetness, I don't see why that would cause us to conclude that it's momentary. So this is definitely something that I think it would be valuable to read more into. Perhaps if we took another route, we would arrive at like a more intuitive result. But this one is definitely not satisfying. So I'll say that the Buddhists definitely have not convinced me yet with their Swalakshnamanism. Does anyone have an argument for why this could cause momentariness? Like, does this make sense to anyone? Like, is there an intuition here from anyone? Okay, yeah.
Well, I was gonna say the intuition is that because its disposition doesn't change, its effects are solely due to like, external factors, but we already kind of know that. That would really seem why that's.
Yeah, I don't think they're talking about external factors here. It's definitely something else. So, yeah, Chris.
Maybe it's like each sugar molecule. It's like producing like a local effect like every time. And it's like by saying it's like simply because it's like there's like nothing else to it. Like one of that sugar molecule that's down to some receptor, then it's sweet. So like in that sense, it's like momentary.
Yeah, maybe it's about locality or like that, right? Like I guess with Swalakshana theory, they'd say that the sweetness itself does exist, right? Because like you have a perception of the sweetness, and that's all that exists for you in that moment. When your attention is focused on the sweetness of the sugar, that's the Swalakshana that is currently existent. That's where your entire existence is. But the cotton candy doesn't exist in that moment. So it's momentary. I guess that might work, but it still is remains unconvincing to me. Okay, let's look at Nyaya Vaisheshika pluralism. So they basically have three criteria for existence: isness or astitva, nameability, so abhideyatva. So isness is like, can you assert that it exists? Like, can you at least make the assertion this is? And then you should be able to name it. You should be able to say, okay, this is a marker, and you should be able to know it somehow. It should be able to be a object of cognition. And based off of these three categories or these three criteria, they break down the list of existence into 7 padarthas. So the 7 padarthas are basically like categories of existence. And we can basically go down this by first asking, so these are the reals, right? So we start at the top. Then we ask, is it present or is it non-present? If it's present, then it's a bhava. If it's non-present, then it's an abhava. Within the non-presence, there isn't like finer grained categories, right? It simply is just an absence. But if it's present, then there's going to be two separate categories that we can have. Either it can be an existent, which means that other things inhere into it, or it can be a subsistent, which means that it inheres into other categories. So this sort of inherence relation is really important in Nyaya. Inherence basically means like, how does one type of existence show up in another? So if we have a fish and it's like red, or let's say it's green actually, because my marker is green. The property of samavaya here is like green is like somehow in this fish, right? This samavaya relation defines inherence. And so all these subsistence, these svatmasat on the right, like universals, particularities, and inherences, those only inhere in other existence. So for example, if we have this green, this like green fish, right? The green is a universal samanya, right? So this is a universal, and then this fish is a substance, a dravya. This greenness is what actually inheres into the fish. And we find that wherever we have a universal, it's always going to be inhering in something else, like a substance or a quality or an action. But we will never find the other way around. We will never find a substance inhering into a universal. We'll never find a quality inhering into an inherence. And they got very deep into this inherent stuff. So they basically say that samavaya inheres into itself, right? If we have an inherence relation, it's sort of self-referential in the sense that every composite term that has inherence itself inheres, like the samavaya inheres in itself, right? So inherence is super important because it allows us to do composition, and it also allows us to do decomposition. So for example, if we have the horn of a rabbit, right? So if we have a horn of a rabbit, we're basically saying that the horn inheres in this rabbit. And the reason why it's important to be able to have this samavaya relation is because now we can say, like, we can go from rabbit's horn as an utterance, and we can convert this into the horn inheres in the rabbit. We can convert it from an utterance of non-reals into a composition of reals. And we can basically say that, like, this does not exist, right? Like DNA, right? We basically say that there is no inherence, like this, there is no inherence present in the relation between born and rabbit. So some of I is a useful kind of semantic tool to talk about these kind of non-referring expressions. So that's like a big thing that Nyaya gets into. They base a lot of their metaphysics around semantics and like epistemology of language. There's also abhava negation, right? That's sort of important to them from a philosophical point of view, because if there is no elephant in the room, then we can perceive the non-existence of the elephant. We can perceive that absence. So in a sense, it exists to them. I'm still a bit more blurry on that. I don't completely buy that idea as well. Any questions here? Or yeah, Chris.
Yeah, so when they say that, like, you're like perceiving facing infinite amount of
Yeah.
seems like that's so intuitive.
Yeah, I don't think they have a problem with I think that's also part of the reason why they don't break down this abhava category, because you can assert like the elephant inheres in the abhava, right? But that doesn't mean you have an infinite amount of abhavas. You only have one elephant, right? And it inheres in the abhava. So like this is true in our situation, right? This exists here. But if I have something else, like a table inheres in the abhava, then that would not be true, because the table, of course, does exist here. It's abhava, yeah.
So they don't consider existence a property of the element.
A property of which of elephants?
Like, yeah, of elements.
No. I mean, like elephantness to them is real. It's a universal. But elephants can inhere into a an absence relation. Yeah. Cool. Or alternatively, it could inhere into like it could inhere into another substance, right? Like you can have an elephant that inheres into the room. And they basically have this system where you can have a compositional hierarchy of existence. So you have the room, and within the room you have tables, you have laptops, and all of these have this kind of tree-like structure that you can break down based off of the sum of I relation. Cool. Any other questions here? Okay. Let's okay. Does anyone want to read out this meme for me? Okay, I'll read it out. Who have the atomic theory to the world? John Dalton? Oh, that would make more sense. No, atomic theory is first introduced by ancient Indian scientist Maharishi Kanada around 2,500 years ago. I'm actually very happy about this meme because it gets the dates pretty accurate. It's sort of it's a bit conservative, and there's people who think Kanada could be like 600 BC, 700 BC, something like that even. Yeah, I mean the meme is like, I guess it's true in a sense. The Vaisheshika school did develop a form of atomism, but it's very important to note the difference between like this metaphysical or ontological view of atomism and a more kind of physically formalized sense of atomism. But Kanada was predated even by other Vedic scholars. So Aruni, around 800 BC, perhaps, came up with his Karna theory of atoms, which was a bit less formalized. But then the Vaisheshika school, which was founded by sage Kanada, came up with this very rigorous kind of approach to atomic theory. Rigorous in the sense that it was very specific and had all these qualities and whatnot, but not rigorous in much of an empirical sense, that obviously they didn't have like particle colliders. So he basically said that there's and like the reality is composed of all these atoms, of 5 different elements, right? Like water, earth, blah, blah, blah. And those elements, those atoms in turn had 25, could have 25 different qualities, which cause them to have relational properties, like basically like chemical properties, something like that. Yeah.
So like the greatest is like someone.
Yeah.
But I'm just like wondering like how do they help? Like do they just sit down?
No, I think it's like Democritus, at least there's a story of him like cutting, what is it, like bread or something like that. Like he cuts it in half and he's like, okay, there's still some bread left. And then he cuts it again and cuts it again, cuts it again. And then he's like, okay, there has to be a point where I like cut it enough times that there was just like a raw piece of like breadness. But breadness itself isn't like a fundamental constituent of reality, is it? No. So there's like, there has to be something more fundamental than breadness. So I'm going to postulate that like breadness is constructed from like water plus like earth or something like that, he says. And basically the same approach is what Pramana takes. Atomism is not that hard to arrive at from a if you look at the world from like a completely blank slate kind of point of view, right?
Also, there are plenty of people who do it's not very
Yeah. Anyone else have questions on atomism? Okay. Oh yeah, and then he basically has this dyad and triad theory that atoms combine into these like dual elements, these dvyarnikas and triarnikas, and then the sum of I relation, this inherence relation, allows you to combine these qualities, right? So different atoms of different types can like compose together in these dyads and triads, and that's what causes these like more complex kind of emergent qualities to show up. Cool. Okay, so we're not gonna have too much time on causation, and the slides are pretty bare anyway, so that's kind of good. But let's first ask the general kind of question. So the Charvaka school were skeptics, as we've seen before. They basically asked like, how can we distinguish causation from correlation? Just because we've seen fire and smoke together a bunch of times doesn't mean we should assume there's any inherent underlying causal relation between fire and smoke. How can we go from correlative observations to postulating some underlying causal relation? Does anyone have an answer to this? How can we distinguish causation from correlation? It actually doesn't have to be that complicated, right? There could be fairly straightforward answers to this. Yeah, Nathan.
Good rule of thumb, something comes before something else, that it's coming before it's probably, or it is likely to be causal factor.
Okay, so what about this? When you start a fire, have you ever started a fire with a bow drill?
I've seen it.
Okay, so when you start a fire with a bow drill, actually what you see first is smoke. The smoke starts fuming up, and then the fire lights. Does that mean that smoke is the cause of fire? Yeah? Huh? No, so what Nathan was what said is that causality is defined temporally, right? So if the smoke shows up before the fire, does that mean that smoke is the cause of fire?
Oh, that's like a valid line of reasoning, right?
But I just gave you a counterexample. The bow drill, right? So if you have a bow drill, right, and you start a fire, it'll start smoking before you see any fire. The fire appears afterwards.
So, like, you can still say temporally everything that came before it was the cause of it, and you can extend that line for everything.
But did the smoke cause the fire?
If it
How
came
did-
before it,
How did the smoke cause the fire?
It's smoke like a byproduct. It's kind of like.
no, but you don't even have to approach it scientifically. You can say everything that exists in that moment contributed to the next moment.
But that, like, how can we distinguish between the correlations and the causes, right? So,
we don't, like, that's the whole line.
but that's the question we were just asking. So here, look at this. Here's the fire.
Like, the problem is you can't do it inductively unless you take that line.
Okay, so then you're like that's perfectly fine. I'm looking for an answer to how can we distinguish causation from correlation. But like here, so we have the combustion, right? And the combustion causes the smoke. and it turns out that we see the smoke appear. So like let's say this is like some level of perception, right? Let's say the fire arrives at this point, but the smoke arrives at this point, right?
Are we taking like layman causation or like philosophical causation? Like, do you have to be able to prove it logically?
I mean, there's like a spectrum of rigorousness. Did I see a hand earlier? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, do they have to strictly like separate correlation and causation? Like for example, well, I can think of, like if someone is like predisposed to depression and then they become an alcoholic, but, the line there is like there was no access to therapy, there was no blah blah blah. But so it's like the predisposition, the alcohol or to depression or alcohol, does it cause that? Or is it like a bunch of factors? Because it's like how far down the line is it the cause?
Yeah, so I think it's perfectly fair to say there's multiple causes that can contribute to an effect, right?
Well, like the butterfly effect, like the butterfly pops its wings, and
That's the
then somewhere
only
down the
causation I
line,
believe.
tornado.
Yeah, so I mean, like with causality, so let's say we have this combustion, right? Obviously, to create this combustion, you have like the bow drill, and you have like my hand and all of this, and all of these are like moving in lockstep to cause this combustion. The combustion then, at a very microscopic level, starts causing the smoke, and the smoke appears first to our perception, right? We're able to perceive the smoke first. And then only after a while we see the fire. But according to what Nathan said, right, we postulate that since the smoke appears first, we draw a connection between that and fire. But that's like not true, right? There's no causal link. So how do we go from the realization, like how do we realize that it's this underlying confounding factor of combustion that causes both the fire and the smoke? And if we can't directly perceive this. Yeah.
We can't inductively prove it unless you allow some level of like subjectivity, right? Like you can, every single time you open a box, there could be an emerald in it, but you can't prove that the next time you open it, there will be emerald in it inductively. You know, like even if all past things, like every time you use the bow drill and you heat it up, it turned out to be a fire, you can't like causally prove it logically.
Is that not what all of physics tries to do though? Like if I say F equals ma.
Well, yeah, but you can say that and you can have every observable like past event like correlate to what you said, but it's still not like inductive.
Well, that's because it's like not a priori knowledge, right?
Exactly.
Because you have some empirical basis to it. So I guess like you're taking the Charbachian viewpoint here, and I think the problem with the Charbachian viewpoint is that like it sets bad boundaries, like bad epistemic boundaries for empirical
The
data.
difference is one requires some level of like subjectivity, the other doesn't. Like you have to put your personal input as to like whether the past events were a high enough percentage to say like, oh, it caused it.
But you have to do the same thing with
So the other line of thinking says you can't establish causality.
well, I mean, even with a priori knowledge, you have to have a sense of subjectivity, right? It depends on the logical system you're working within. You can have a logical system you're working within that has a law of excluded middle, and other people could say that's a subjective choice you made. You made that axiomatic choice. So all the supposedly a priori knowledge you have is subjective. Nathan.
Well, I was going to add that it's even more difficult than like just these examples. Correlation isn't necessarily like a strong result from causation, because there are a lot of things that are caused by something, but they can also be caused by a multiple.
Yeah.
Which we kind of say as like an offhand remark about causation, but it also makes it difficult to discern. Because like we have really strong correlations to things that aren't caused at all, and they're like pretty weak correlations to things that generally do have a strong
Causal, yeah. Yeah, it's very hard to disentangle, and like in a sense, at the naturalistic level, this is like what all of physics tries to do, right? It tries to be like, we see these things correlated a lot. Why are they correlated? Let's like do some strong empirical research. And I think what I answer is that like we're not going to get to any improvement in understanding causality through any kind of logic, or like through any like a priori logic. It ultimately is empirical, right? We have to lower this perceptual boundary. We have to be able to get to an even lower level where now we can see, oh, it's combustion. And the way you do that is microscopes. The way you do that is like telescopes, whatever.
So then the line of thinking is that like you have to know everything about the current moment to be able to accurately predict the next moment, which is the only kind of like causality. That's what I was talking about earlier. If you want to be like with 100% accuracy.
With 100% accuracy, yeah, you have to like.
Excluding like certain things that are truly random sentences.
I saw Chris shaking his head.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, like, did you have an opinion? Like,
It's like,
Yeah,
this
so
is like
I
a
think,
thing from the.
yeah, like what you said about that, so ethical MA, that's, so like, even if that was like, you know, always trying to all that, like, maybe there's like just some weird, like, we can imagine that the universe is just like, maybe like ethical MA squared for like some, for like 35%.
yeah.
Like, I mean, that's sort of like not out of the longest imagination. If that's the case, then, yeah, because like I mean like basically all of science is like it's not popular, so we have to do empirical tests, and we can only have like a downtime.
Yeah.
So like yeah, but then about what you're saying, like, oh yeah, knowing the entire state of the universe, like a single moment to predict everything else. Like yeah, there are like two schools of thought where it's like on one hand it's like it's like controlling in nature, and if that's like
What does that mean?
yeah, so like,
Suggest otherwise.
yeah, like, so if it is controlling, then that means that there might be some variables that are hidden from us, but theoretically we figured out so that like we would be able to like just figure everything out like but that also goes very complex.
So I mean, like this like Bohmian kind of duality, I guess, is sort of the same as like saying that nobles are a subset of existence, right? That like there's existent underlying kind of causes that we simply cannot like empirically show the existence of. Okay, interesting. Okay, let's just breeze through these last two things. This is like a pretty this is like an attempt at explaining causality by the Sankhya Yoga school. I don't think it addresses most of the concerns that we brought up though. So like they basically have this like transformation theory where they say that causality is like implicit, like effect is implicit in the cause. So like the milk causes the curd, the seed causes the plant is already inherent in the seed, the curd is already inherent in the milk. So the causality relation is not two-sided. There's no cause and effect. There's no cause and effect. Rather, the effect is like implicit in the cause, something like that almost. And there's some other like the Nyaya school would say the efficient causes like you're basically turning this just into material causes and ignoring the efficient causes. Like for example, for the seed to grow into a plant, you have to like put water on it, etc. And those efficient causes, right, things that help things along their way, that are means to an end, those like the Sankhya theory is ignoring those. But the Sankhya Yoga school would respond that the efficient causes simply remove obstacles to the potential. So the seed causally has the effect of the plant in it. It's just that there's like some almost like boundaries that prevent this from happening. And by putting water on it, by putting sunshine on it, we like remove the sort of the boundaries that prevent the effects from evolving. And they basically are, again, we talked about this a bit, but they're very obsessed with this idea of like the ever-evolving prakriti, right? This like material existence that follows these like laws of physics essentially that just continue evolving, and the Purusha are simply witnesses to it. So let's so this is the last slide. The Jainas have like this idea of non-absolutism, anekantavada, which literally means like many-sidedness. So they basically say that cause is substance and effect is form, right? So or vice versa, you can have like cause as form and effect as substance. So from one point of view, causality is inherent, right? Because the cause is the substance. And from another the form of the object isn't inherent because it's part of the effect. So like the example they give is like a pot is pre-existent in the clay because they're like the same matter. So from one point of view, the cause, like the effect is inherent in the cause. But from another point of view, you need the potter's effort and water, etc., to shape the clay into a pot. So from that point of view, effect isn't inherent in the cause. So I'm very unsatisfied with these explanations of causality. And there's more sophisticated approaches by like the Nyayikas, for example, but I don't think we have time to go over those. And I didn't make slides for those. So yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, any questions on these other like theories of causality, transformation theory, non-absolutism, or general thoughts on causality, correlation?
Are we going to talk about causality? Or like another class?
Not directly.
Okay, so then like there's different lines of thinking when it comes to causality, right? Like can it go backwards forever, or are there like circular things that are allowed and those kind of different theories, right? Because if you say every single thing has a cause and then you keep going back, if there's no circles and time goes linearly, then what caused the first thing ever kind of, that's used as a first cause argument to justify God. What? Well, this is what people use to justify God. They're saying that if you've established that everything has a cause, and you keep going backwards, something. Well, okay, so infinite is like one counter argument to it. It's a really interesting argument for that, because they say that it can't be infinite. There's no backwards infinite loops. There's no circular loops, and time is linear. Some of them like that, like that.
Yeah, I feel like saying that there's no backwards infinite is like not necessarily like a fair axiom. And at least within the Indian tradition, the basic assumption is that like time is infinite for most of Indian history. The idea of a creator god in like Indian history is a relatively novel thing.
The arguments, there's a good counterexample for backwards infinite chains, which are basically, I can kind of pull it up, but it's essentially like, if you have like a lamp and every time, okay, well, let me pull up the actual. Yeah.
Wait, can you explain the analogy?
So, okay, let me pull it up. I don't want to butcher it.
Yeah, I think it's so one I've heard is that every so okay, so it's like a finite period of time, but it's like I guess every time you have it's sort of like
It doesn't have to be half. You can define it whatever you want.
yeah,
Eventually,
then-
someone has to.
so then it's like it switches on and off, it increasingly sort of and then eventually like it like reaches the end, right? But then when you ask like is it on at the final state, is it on and off? But because it went like an infinite matter, like on and off.
I
Like, it's like a
understand.
paradox.
Okay, so suppose we have a lamp. It's called the reverse Thomson lamp, which at 8 a.m. it's turned off. Now there's an infinite number of lamp lighters, or 0, 1, whatever. And lamplighter L0 is the last one to check on the lamp at 8:30. The person before him checked it at 8:15. Person before him at 8:07, etc. Now, if the lamp is not already lit at the time of visit, when the lamplighter comes, they turn it on. If it's already on, they leave it on. So, after 8:30 a.m., is the lamp on or off?
It like doesn't this depend on your like starting case?
I mean, sure. Either way. Okay, so then you turn it on. No, at 8 a.m. it's off.
Oh well, you're making an assertion about like the 0 point when that's
Yeah.
not necessarily fair.
Well, it's saying that
Like we don't have empirical evidence of like zero.
you can't have a backwards infinite chain, but this is trying to argue against. But someone had to have turned it on the first time.
Like
But if there was someone before him, then he turned it on.
I think starting at 8 a.m. is like that's
that's the, yeah, I think that's the fallacy, right? Because like we don't have empirical evidence of like a start to the universe. Like there we can run simulations that go like infinitesimally like back, right? Like point. Yeah, how much is it? Yeah, we can go like 10 to the negative 36 seconds. After this,
the big thing.
Like 10 to the negative 36.
Like we know very well, or like fairly well, what happened up to that point.
So we can approach it in the limit, but like so it's like we can go like lim x 0, but we can't talk about 0 itself.
Literally anyone that.
Yeah.
Wait, so do most scientists believe it's also impossible to ever know?
I'm not sure about that.
I think most physicists actually like refuse to have.
Also, I think something that's important to note is that like we think about this as getting smaller and smaller, but the reals are like scale invariant. Like there are equally as many reals between 10 to the negative 36 times 1 and 2 times 10 to the negative 36 as there are between 1 and like 1 and 10. Like these are the same cardinality. Like the reals between these are of the same cardinality, right?
Until you get to the size.
Huh? Yeah. So I guess my point is that like scale invariance could be something that we just completely misinterpret. And like even like to us, it might be like, oh, 10 to the negative 36 seconds before like after the Big Bang. Oh, sure, that's like such a small segment of time. But like in a sense, that's like it's time. There's no reason to assume like it would be a pretty fair extrapolation based off of our perception that time is continuous to say that time is of the same structure as the reals. And like at smaller scales, it behaves the same way it does at these higher scales. No. I mean, wait, like we can't know that, but I feel like it's a fair extrapolation. Like saying that, oh, since it's so small, then we have to be able to talk about 0 is a fallacy in my opinion.
But there is the concept.
Yeah, right? Like time is quantized.
Yeah, it's not exactly. Like there's like a very specific.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording, but like how empirically backed is or wait.